Hi, Megan. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Megan is a partner with Upstream Intelligence, which is an OSINT firm. And today we're going to be talking about how AI has changed the game for the OSINT field, specifically in the grander scheme of things for cybersecurity. So I want to get started with my first question. Do you think that organizations are underestimating or overestimating the value of OSINT today with AI now in the space that can automate some of that stuff, some of those functions?
Yeah, I think that it continues to be underestimated and maybe not so much underestimated, but I think not everyone's a gambler. And so the fact that OSINT research, you don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what is out there. The sort of cost benefit of doing it continues to be a little bit underestimated because I think when we do find that smoking gun, it's invaluable. And so the willingness to approach it, I think always needs to be reiterated. I think, especially with AI, because there end up being questions now in the realm of, and we get it both ways. We get, how do I know this isn't AI? And we also get, oh, that's not me, that's AI. So we actually are seeing this both ways. And so the ability to find little bits and pieces of a story that prove or disprove that continues to be very valuable. And it's interesting because I would say by and large, AI isn't something, even though I say that we're seeing it both ways like that already, it doesn't overly concern me. And I know that it's getting better and I know it will continue to get better. But right now, anybody who has real familiarity with it knows that it is not a mastermind by any stretch of the imagination. And it's actually still very simple in a lot of cases to see and be able to disprove something as AI just with our own two eyes. So as it continues to get better, I think it's just a new avenue for OSINT tools to improve in. And it's not moving at such a pace that it's outpacing that ability to create those tools that are going to keep up with it. At least not that I'm seeing right now.
Gotcha. You mentioned that you have folks who are saying that's not me, that's AI. How do you go about disproving that? I assume you look at the metadata, or what are your give me an example of how you disprove something like
Sure.
that.
It depends. It depends on the situation. But, you know, there was one, I can give an example. There was one where it was a video recording and the person in the video got in trouble for saying something in this recording. And that was the argument. That's not me. That's the person who took that video used AI to change what I said. And there are a couple of different things that we can do with that. Like you mentioned, metadata is going to be a huge one. And knowing the full context of when it was supposed to have been taken, all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes it's also just as simple as if AI is used somehow to replicate somebody's voice and lay that over the original audio, there's going to be some little markers there that happen digitally, but also you have to expect that there's going to potentially even be an issue with somebody's mouth. They can change what you're hearing, but how closely is AI going to be able to mimic what that would look like? Because right now, it's not. If you've seen it work with words and there's just things that it does that are still mind boggling and a lot of obviously funny videos out there of it on the internet. But yeah, it's a combination of things. And like I said, using our own two eyes sometimes, even just in an initial assessment to say, what is this going to take to look at? Sometimes it's not much because you can just tell there's nothing here that gives any indication that this has been tampered with on its face. And then you look deeper and that's still the case.
Gotcha. Where do you think AI genuinely adds value in OSINT, and where does it introduce new risk or false confidence? How do you see it augmenting your workflow?
So yeah, the risk I would say is still pretty pervasive. It's not trustworthy. It's not something that you can just throw information at and expect it to do a perfect job of understanding what you want, how you want it. And it's actually got a lot of issues with omission. It still really can't sort different individuals or reliably attribute information necessarily to specific individuals. There's a lot that I think it makes sense that everyone wants to make sure that they're leveraging it. You just have to make sure you're doing it the right way. And we've come into it with this idea of being very cautious and being very aware of the fact, because a lot of what we do is going to end up in a courtroom. When we're helping attorneys on the civil side, we don't want anything that is going to end up causing an issue. And so the way that AI can actually help with investigations, a lot of the time, it's more in the ways of helping us to understand what our possible resources are, or helping us crunch data, and not data to be reported on necessarily, but data that's going to help us in a context we might not have seen before. Because the thing about investigations is there's all different types. And I'm sure you see this in cybersecurity too, where people are coming from all different professions, all different specialties. And sometimes when we get asked something for an investigation, it's not something we've heard of before. So we can actually, rather than having to put somebody on Google research and go to the library and figure out what this means, that's not a thing anymore. Now you can just get at least a very good and not necessarily basic understanding of a contextual situation just by leveraging AI and asking it the right things. So I would say that's certainly something. Obviously, using it as a builder to build tools, it's pretty good getting better with programming, and you can spin something up pretty quickly. So those are the ways that it's helpful, but we certainly have to be very clear about the things that we're not doing with it, because alongside a lot of the things in the OSINT realm, we also do, I mentioned the video, we have these issues of forensics, video, audio, photo forensics. And we're never, ever employing AI to try and tell us something about any of those media or even something online. It's not an analyst. It's a tool for analysts, but it's not an analyst.
That's a good point that you mentioned that it's not an analyst. There's one camp of people who's saying AI is going to eliminate and take away everything just everything, blanket statement. But there's still the other camp that says we still need humans in the loop to provide that analytical function, to be able to do the critical thinking. And AI is not there yet. Or will it ever be there yet? We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, because honestly, right now, as much as the word intelligence is used, it's functioning by parroting. It's parroting what it thinks a human wants it to say. It doesn't have that confidence that somebody who's thought critically about a matter has. Because as soon as and I'm sure you've seen it, as soon as you say to AI, that's not quite right, it's never, no, I'm positive. It's,
It
oh,
reanalyzes,
you're right. Like,
goes
yeah,
back
it
to,
kinda, yeah, and it backs up. So it just, yeah, the people, I think, like I said, everybody wants to be using it and putting it out there, making sure that we're all on the cutting edge as it's happening, of course. But I think the missteps that are happening are with having it be an analyst, asking it to be a paralegal, asking it to do these functions that it's just not there yet. And obviously, I know there's a lot of fear around whether or not it gets there, because I think that's a whole another conversation, is the critical thinking and what that looks like for society, but it's just certainly not yet.
got it. How do you think threat actors are using OSINT differently compared to even a year or two ago now that AI is in the mix? Do you see them using it and being able to get away with things that maybe they weren't able to get away with in the past? Or what are your thoughts on that?
There's a little bit of that. I think I've heard a few different examples just of people using AI to try and get away with things. I don't know. There's a difference between sort of your average Joe taking an opportunity to try and use AI to get away with something, and the people that we would think of as a little bit more sophisticated threat actors. I do think that when it comes to the ability to crunch that data, to pull out information, to paint a picture that somebody can think about critically, that if you're smart is being leveraged for sure. But at the end of the day, I think it's probably just expediting things more than it's really changing too much of the face of the game. And again, that depends on the level of threat actor. Obviously, there are folks who figure out fancy things to do all the time. But by and large, I would say if you're going to steal somebody's identity and go at it that route to infiltrate a system or a company or whatever that might look like, there's still going to be some level of human in it. There's still going to be some level of OSINT in it, even if you're using AI to help you paint that full picture that you need to be able to impersonate somebody. So I haven't seen enough to know exactly where I think that's going yet, but
Yeah.
it's certainly interesting. And I think the thing that we try to remember is that this is technology. This is a continuation of what's been happening for the last 40 some odd years, where as technology improves, there's this sort of playing catch up as people figure out how to use it for nefarious purposes, having that ability to keep up. And I think that AI is not very different from a lot of things that we've seen in the past. As much as somebody can leverage it to do harm, you can employ it to make it that much easier to keep up with that. So yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly, I would say, more interesting than a lot of technological developments have been, just from an accessibility standpoint and a creativity standpoint. I think there have been a lot of technologies that you have to have a lot of very specific knowledge to be able to use them. And AI is so accessible. So that's really, I think, and maybe even the basis for your question. Anybody can get at it. Anybody can do
Yeah.
anything with it that they can think of. So what does that look like? And it's, I think it's still unfolding.
Yeah. People are still experimenting and getting creative about how to use it in that way, as well as many other things. I One example I could think of is phishing. With phishing emails, I was reading that, like you said, AI expedites many types of threats, and phishing is one of them. And so the scale at which you can send them, and also just making it sound more convincing. Do you ever have things like that where someone has created false evidence or falsified documents and they're saying, "This is
Absolutely.
true"? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think in a lot of cases, or at least where I've seen it, it's easy AI is also just very tempting, right? We've seen it where I'm just anonymizing this example in my head right now. So we had one employer who said, we hired this person. They haven't started yet. And somebody sent us this press release that we supposedly did saying that we hired them,
Mm.
but we didn't do that. And did they use AI to do this? And you look at it and it's to some extent in that situation, neither here nor there, how they did it. But I think people can very quickly use AI to mock something like that up. And especially when they're using it in a way where they don't think they're going to get caught. They don't think somebody's going to see it, who can verify it, that sort of thing. And like you said with phishing, I think when I think, what are people going to do with AI? Somebody who's already getting breach data off the dark web is going to use AI to build a tool to filter and work with that data more quickly. They're going to expedite the ability to pull out those email addresses. You can build all kinds of tools with AI. So a bad actor, yeah, is going to do any number of things with it. But then also, I think just in a very human way, humans who just want to make themselves look a little bit better or create a persona that's more in the catfishing realm, maybe than a criminal realm. There's a lot that you can do with it. And I think I'll say it again, just remains to be seen what exactly are the mass issues that are going to come up with it. Because right now, I think it's pretty situational, unless you are doing a lot more of those criminal investigations, the three-letter agencies, those folks, I think, are the ones who really have to figure out how are these, especially overseas fraud rings that engage in some of this, the big phishing campaigns and things, how are they going to work with it?
Gotcha. Are there emerging ethical or governance challenges as OSINT and AI become intertwined? What's that? What's that like? Can you give any
Yeah,
examples?
there's a couple. So again, we have to really approach this from the footing of we're going to be presenting something in court. And so there has to be a human who can lay a foundation for a report. A report isn't going to be generated by AI. There's no way to then get that put in evidence. Similarly, especially like I mentioned with the forensics, there's this, again, I think it's a temptation to build tools or to want there to be tools that can do forensics and employ AI in those forensics. It's AI still isn't, as I've said, really completely up to the challenge of doing that. And it's problematic from a legal standpoint. There was actually a case, I think last year in Washington state, where the judge ruled that this video evidence was going to get thrown out because the tool that was used to enhance it employed AI. And so that's adding information to media that didn't exist in the original copy, in the original version. And when you're adding information like that, now you've completely contaminated it. It's not the original evidence. And we've seen it to where we can do an enhancement. We had asked about license plates a lot. We can do an enhancement, not quite get a full plate. Happens all the time. There's one or two letters that are just still kind of look like the artist formerly known as Prince, and you're trying to figure out what does this mean. And we actually have a couple of tools that can make a guess at that. We actually have an AI component that can guess what that letter might be. And we've actually seen it be very hit or miss, because ultimately we as humans will figure out through a few different wildcard type searches when it comes to make and model vehicle, state, all this other stuff we can pull in these other points of context. And we'll find out what a plate actually was. And AI just maybe did not get even that close. So there's real reasons to be concerned about having it do anything that's going to enter a courtroom.
There's an AI note taker, for instance, that I use for meetings sometimes. I'm not using it now, but I'll sometimes use it because it transcribes. And like you said, the transcription is hit or miss. Sometimes it understands what we're talking about, or sometimes it gets the name of the end client wrong. And I'm like, that's not their name. And I have to go back and fix it a little bit, but it helps expedite me having to do handwritten notes or typing it out. So I'm like, okay, I'll do this as my starting point and I'll just check and filter
Sure.
out incorrect. But then what if there's a conversation that was had while that AI note taker was recording that for whatever reason had to be submitted as evidence? I imagine that gets thrown out.
Not necessarily. That's going to be up to a judge. And I'm not an expert in the law,
Sure.
but there's this best evidence rule. So if your notes are central to this case, and the only thing, it's like caveat, just so you know, this was actually taken by AI, that gets asked. Certainly, opposing counsel can argue in front of a judge that it shouldn't be able to be entered because you didn't write it by hand. They can go any which way they want with that. And that would be up to a judge to move forward in whatever way they see fit. And I think it would be really situational. So I don't think that there would be any kind of overarching law necessarily that would fit, just because there are scenarios where maybe it's not causing an issue. I think when you're talking about video evidence and the proof of this was you driving this vehicle because this car is registered to you and the license plate is yours. Oh, but wait, we as humans really couldn't figure out what that plate was. AI did it for us. That's where the weakness starts to come in. Because if you literally added information and data to a video to come to a conclusion, you've added something that wasn't there and you basically just completely messed with the evidence. So I think it's going to be situational. And I think, yeah, just that ability to verify whether or not something is AI is going to be the first question, the first hurdle that we need to jump before we get into where does it actually fit into the legal system or into investigations in any kind of well-rooted way.
Got it. If you had to give security leaders an OSINT related takeaway for 2026, what would it be? What would be your piece of advice for security leaders who would be leveraging OSINT to help in any facet of their business?
Be the one in control. And that's one thing I can say that has a lot of tendrils that have to be satisfied to have that be the case. But if you are the person who's responsible for security and risk in your organization, you need to know what is out there about your organization or even key man. You got to make sure that anybody who could come under fire for any number of reasons, what's out there for them, and make sure that they stay safe, but also there are vulnerabilities everywhere. And I think understanding what can be exploited, you have to work backwards. And that's something that we do actually here too. We will review the entire presence for individuals. We've done it for many CEOs and other C-suite members, where we basically employ all of our OSINT strategies alongside some other more high-level ones to say, here's what I can find out about you. Here's how I can exploit it. These are the risks that you actually are facing right now based on everything that we can find for you. And here's how you fix that, which is the main piece, right? And when you're doing that for individuals, you can also do that for organizations. I do think a huge piece of that is the cybersecurity that y'all do. But there are other things, very simple sort of steps that you can take just to make sure that physical security they're so intertwined. Just what can be found online, how that can be leveraged in the real world. There's a lot of overlap. So making sure that the images that are out there are the ones you want out there. Does it make sense to have photos of your key personnel on a website? Or is that something that's unnecessary and does more harm than good? There are a lot of these questions that have to be asked. And I'm never going to tell somebody the only way to have control is to have as little out there as but to do nothing. But I think there's just some balance that has to be achieved. And in order to do that, you have to know everything that's out there. You have to have that level of control.
Is there any other information or advice that you'd like to share from what you've learned working at Upstream?
I think there are like a couple of just simple things that you can do if you haven't done it and you are in that position of being a security or risk manager. I think, how simple have you made it for somebody to find the information they would need to impersonate a member of your organization? One of the most simple things you can do is make sure that you own every possible version of your website. Anything, when we've seen this a few times, where the reason a scam can take place or the reason bad actors can impersonate a company is because they can buy a domain that's just very similar to that company's domain or seems like it should belong to that company. So taking control of that, own every single version that makes sense in that scope for a bad actor to potentially leverage and keep that from it. So that's just one example. And I'm sure I could probably talk for too long about the sort of like easy things that you can do. But I think that's just the right mindset to be in. Yeah, it's just the right mindset to be in of what are the potential points of vulnerability? And sometimes there's a lot of them.
Gotcha. Megan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I hope we can check in again soon and get that part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.